Welcome back to The Joy of Medicine. I'm Trey Cashion. That's Dr. Richard Cashion, or Dad, a.k.a. Dad, and Caleb's over there. And we have, for the first time, we have a guest, Arland Nichols, who fortunately I've been blessed to know for, it's got to be 20 plus years.
25 plus, yeah.
25 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, he was here when we first started at St. Mary's as a student, and he's come a long way, baby. But I'll let him introduce. I love what he's doing at the St. John Paul II Foundation, and I'll let you kind of walk through what you do, and then we'll get into the meat of it, which is going to be about his bioethics text that he's written in healthcare. And anyway, go ahead.
Sure. It's great to be with you both. And Dr. Cashion, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your son talks about you all the time. It's usually positive. So he's always got a high praise for you. It's awesome that y'all do this together. I'm Arland Nichols, president and founder of the St. John Paul II Foundation. We're based in Houston, and we serve married couples, medical professionals, and our clergy all throughout the country, and blessed to do the incredible apostolate that's been entrusted to us.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great work, really blessed work. The most important thing anybody can know about me is I'm the father of 10 kiddos and have an incredible wife, Cindy.
Yeah, she's your better half. Sure.
My better 9/10 is probably more accurate. It's a pleasure to be with you. And like you mentioned, I've got this new book, Handbook on Critical Life Issues, coming out.
Is that the title of it?
Yeah, it's the fourth edition. It's been a labor of love, this book. But
wow,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Handbook on Critical Life
Issues. And that kind of
issues.
flows from the fact that part of St. John Paul II Foundation is Converging Roads, and that's
right.
And that's geared towards what is that? Exactly?
Yeah, so for medical professionals. So one of our 3 initiatives is called Converging Roads. It's a continuing education conference in Catholic healthcare ethics, helping doctors, helping nurses, chaplains bring their faith, bring their ethics into the practice of medicine, right? With that conviction that patients are better served when we bring the faith into the practice of medicine, when we bring our ethical convictions into the practice of medicine. And so through Converging Roads, we help doctors and nurses do that all over the country. And it's a day-long intensive conference. They get to earn continuing education credits and hear about great medicine that's ethical medicine from the perspective of our faith, from the perspective of natural law, from the perspective of Hippocratic oath, and really transform practices and then in turn the patients that they serve. So yeah, it's one of our 3 initiatives. My area is healthcare ethics. So that's where my doctoral studies were in healthcare ethics, and I love it. Don't get to do it much these days because I'm running a small, nonprofit, but it's fun when I get to.
Not to mention, well, you got a good CEO.
Well, we're glad you're here to share your.
Yeah, I think, so the Converging Roads, I'm making an assumption, is the faith and medicine. Is that?
The roads that converge are medicine and ethics, or faith and ethics. Yeah. So, again, it's, at the end of the day, it's that conviction that good medicine is ethical medicine, and ethical medicine is good medicine. And the more that those two converge, right, the better our patients are going to be served. And we see that, time and time again, science, medicine, right? The ethical approach is the right medical approach every time, right? It really is remarkable in God's incredible design, right? That the two are supposed to converge.
We're going to let the Holy Spirit lead this, but from the I know like theologians, people that have gotten to the doctoral level, define terms.
Sure.
And so while I think ethics is kind of a word that is thrown around, how would you define ethics? I didn't throw you a curveball.
Yeah, no, that's okay. At the end of the day, it's about being the virtuous man or woman, right? Virtue is an excellence of man, right? Vir means man, right? So that's where we get the word virtue from. And so virtue is about possessing and living out the excellences of what it means to be a human being. And so ultimately, that's what ethics is about, right? Is about living the virtuous life, living the good life, living an excellent life, and using our freedom well for the pursuit of all that is good, true, and beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's based on an understanding of what is true, which, today, kind of sidebar, with relativism, my truth and your truth. I mean, there is the truth,
right?
The person of Jesus,
important, yeah,
of Jesus Christ, and that's what I guess virtue and ethics is about: conforming ourselves to the truth as has been revealed, right?
That's right.
Not something that we've generated from our own thoughts. So that would be a Christian ethic, right?
Oh yeah. Today, you've seen this for years, right? And we lament it, right? I am my own God, right? I am my own rule and measure. If I want it, and as long as I'm not hurting anyone, I can do it. Well, no, God gave us, right, a nature, and it's been received, right? And we're called to live in accord with the nature that has been so generously bestowed upon us, right? And insofar as we do so is insofar as we will thrive, right? And if we act against our nature and do not know that natural law, which is what the church calls it, we're going to harm ourselves. We're not going to truly be able to flourish. So at the end of the day, if you want to truly flourish in this life and then ultimately, of course, in the next, right? Pursuing acts, right, that are in accord with the nature that he gave us is absolutely essential. One of the areas in which we do this, of course, is in medical decision making and all of that. But that's just one small area in which we choose what is good and true and beautiful, or the opposite.
Right. And so we'll focus on that. Could you just give you talked about it before, but just kind of the overview of kind of the three sections of the book
of the book. Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. So the handbook is organized with three different unique sections. The first is largely foundations. And so it's foundations and principles. So it begins with what is the human person? And we go through Greek thought. What do the Greeks say? What do the modern philosophers say? What does John Paul II as a philosopher say? All right, and ultimately, it hasn't changed all that much, right, from today in terms of a firm understanding of a human person from Aristotle to John Paul II. And then basic principles that help us to make decisions. The centrality of the patient-physician relationship. So these sorts of things are covered in that first section. What does it mean to be a physician? What does it mean to serve a patient made in the image and likeness of God? Those sorts of things. The second section is organized on the beginning of life and the creation of new life. And so it's everything. We cover topics, or I keep saying I cover topics, right, from, contraception and natural family planning to infertility, and just abortion and, all those sorts of beginning of life and issues around sexuality. Each one gets its own chapter or two chapters. And I think it's a very approachable analysis of those sorts of things. And then the final section is issues along the lifespan and at the end of life. And so there cover, everything from end of life decision making to organ donation is a hot topic right now. Food and water at the end of life and with severe disability and all those kinds of things. Also, some of the more controversial topics that enter into the realm of sexuality, like transgender issues as well. And
that's in there too.
Yes, because there's significant life and death realities around some of these issues of sexuality. Around homosexuality, transgender issues. There's some serious negative outcomes for when the wrong medical care is provided for these patients. And so making sure we understand what good medical care looks like. The drug stuff, we're talking about, all kinds of that along the lifespan.
So just something that might be hard to understand. We're not going to get through all this.
No. It's 400 plus pages. 400 plus pages.
So, maybe if we don't run Arland off and we might have to have him come back and drill down into some of those. But I think it's, there were a couple things, and I don't know whether you mentioned before, but it kind of ties into the fact that things haven't necessarily changed, understanding the human person between Aristotle and today. Mm-hmm. And where does, you'd mentioned maybe prior, I don't know if you mentioned it in our, just as we started, the Hippocratic Oath, because I know my dad has has an affinity towards that, and we had talked about how does that tie into a Christian sense. But what with regard to the Hippocratic Oath, do doctors take the Hippocratic Oath anymore? I don't know.
It's a mixed bag on that front. So I can tell you this: at our conferences, they do. And it mentions God, right?
Okay,
and keeps all the important parts out. So many of our medical schools don't do it anymore. It's kind of a practice that's kind of disappeared, or it's an elective thing. And then those that do offer it, they've usually taken out the parts that explicitly mention abortion. It uses different language, but abortion as well as euthanasia, and so it's been kind of made politically correct, you might say. And then some of our other, there are pockets where there's a Christian influence where it's still stated, but at the end of the day, it is the foundational statement, you can say, for what medicine is, right? Because when the Hippocratic Oath was
that's
written,
pre-Christian, right?
Oh, pre-Christian. I mean, it's
way back,
absolutely foundational, and it was a corrective of what was being done poorly at the time. We won't go fully down that route, but it was absolutely essential for moving people from witchcraft, frankly, right, to medicine that was at the service of the patient. So it's a foundational thing, and I think doctors would be would do well to continue to study it.
It was a big part when I graduated from medical school that we all took the Hippocratic Oath, and as you mentioned, there's some schools that don't even do it. Where did that come from? In other words, how did we get rid of it?
Right. I just think that it's largely been the culture thing. You know, I mean, it says inconvenient things. Right. I mean, it's
which the truth often.
It's very direct, right? Especially about abortion. It's very direct, and euthanasia, ending a patient's life prematurely. And so today, right, in our culture, I think that's just rather inconvenient. But even more than the specific topics, to propose that there's a right way to do medicine, right, is an affront, right? You have your truth, I have my truth. And it's just even that notion, right, that there's such a thing as good medicine and bad medicine, or really it's probably good medicine and not medicine at all, right? I think even that itself today, by and large, is considered
so it's a cultural thing. I mean, people
I think
sort of drifted in that direction.
A gradual drift, and before you realize it, we have patients taking lives in 10 states out of 50 in our own country, right at the end of life.
So euthanasia's,
that's with assisted suicide.
Assisted suicide, is legal or
legal in those states? Oh yeah.
Wow.
10 states.
Just make sure not to move there.
Yeah, no, I won't be able to list them all, but it might be usual suspects.
Right. Well, I bet I could probably
Oregon, Washington, Colorado. I mean, and some of the East Coast. So,
right.
Yeah.
But I think it gets back down to it is, from a Christian perspective in medicine and out, as I mentioned, there are truths that are outside of ourselves that we're meant to conform ourselves to. Right. It's not something that's internally generated, that we determine what's good or what's bad or whatever. I mean, it's not up to us. So we have to search for what's true, good, and beautiful, and then try to conform ourselves to that. And it's amazing to me that the Hippocratic Oath,
that's crazy.
So many years before did that. And as I understand it, I could be wrong, that part of it was there were exactly the things that we have going now, and there was a lack of trust, which we talked between healthcare professionals, whatever, and patients, because you might call and say, Dad's kind of being a pain in the rear, as sick as he is, can we just end it? Kind of thing, right? I mean, and I guess you'd want a doctor that had taken the Hippocratic Oath and took it seriously,
right? Absolutely,
at the time, and it's kind of scary that that's not the case. Did you you remember taking the Hippocratic Oath?
Oh, yeah. It was a big part of the graduation. I mean, it was done at the graduation ceremony.
Is that when they do it, the ones that do it now? Do they do it at graduation?
Some do it at the graduation or a shindig afterwards or prior to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not always connected to.
They've removed it from the public.
In some cases, yes. Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like, you've met one priest, you've met one priest, right? I mean, everyone is different, right? So it's kind of the same thing here. I think each medical school approaches it differently these days.
I think we'd be encouraged, would encourage people if they don't to make it an oath of their own, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and that's one of the things I mentioned that we do at our conferences. We have we either do there's a promises of the Catholic physician that's recently been done by the International Catholic Medical Association, but then there's also the Hippocratic Oath. And so depending, which city we're in, we'll do one or the other. And I'll tell you, the physicians and nurses who do that really appreciate it. And I take it because I do ethics consults in the area of medicine, even though I'm not a physician, and I have to abide by the same things, that are in that promises of the Catholic medical professional. So it really is a meaningful part of our Converging Roads conferences. Usually it's part of the luncheon. And it's just an essential way to conform your life as a physician around it, or as a nurse around this oath or this profession defining oath.
Right. Well, so we'll dive in and get into the very shallow, but I'd like to focus on, because that first part from a foundational standpoint, the understanding of the human person, and then as it relates to medicine, the centrality of the patient, of the physician-patient relationship, and what that's all about. So, like both in terms of ethics and maybe what you see or hear in practice, and maybe Dad, you could jump in terms of particularly on the physician-patient relationship, how that impacts. But I'd be interested in, because that is about as foundational as it gets in terms of the actual practice of medicine.
That was related to that. It's always difficult to talk about these things with the patient. In other words, and the issues come up as to whether it is, quote, ethical, that you can talk about it. As a matter of fact, there have been a lot of societies and medicine that has said it's not ethical to talk about these things.
Sure.
In other words, you can't talk about them. And
you'd been at some place recently where to even bring the faith or anything,
right,
was not only discouraged, was just basically said you.
And some of the thing, one of these, I'm old enough now at 82 to practice in every kind of medicine there is. And before I retired, I was involved with the government healthcare.
Okay.
And we were actually given a lecture as we were being oriented to this, is do not talk about, death, dying, or whatever. In other words, it's with an ethical standpoint. Do not discuss these things with the patient.
Yeah.
And I almost left, but I thought, well, maybe it's better to stay there and fight the system.
Right. No, that's an incredible shame. I can't help but think of the principle of informed consent.
Right.
And this is actually in, I think, my 4th chapter, talking about informed consent. I mean, patients have a right to know their situation, to know their prognosis, right? To the extent that they can understand it and it can be communicated to them, right? So they can make decisions, so they can know where they are in terms of even to their final end in this life, right? That's a shame, right? That to be deprived of the ability to even, be sober about the frailty of this particular man or this particular woman,
and particularly relating it to a higher power. They just didn't want to talk about that at all.
And there's an art to that. That's one of the topics we get a lot. We get requested to cover a lot in our medical ethics conferences, and but taking a spiritual inventory is the phrase that's used these days. Just ask simple questions. Do you belong to a faith community that it would be beneficial for you to hear from? Is there anything for which I can pray? Depending on the answers, is there anything for which I can pray today? But even the little gentle, subtle things, by having that crucifix around your neck, right? It might jog, right? Or that rosary on your finger, whatever it might be. It might jog and create opportunities, create teachable moments, create opportunities to really help serve the patients. And there's so much literature today, a lot of literature about how spiritual care increases and improves outcomes.
Absolutely.
I mean, and there's nothing in the other direction, right?
Right.
So it just doesn't make sense.
There was a guy that I worked with for a number of years named Herb Benson. We've talked about him many times, and he's actually done some studies. He's a Harvard, which is nowadays not good to say, but he's a Harvard physician. And when I was there, he talked about spirituality in medicine is what he talked about. And it was, at that time, that was a long time ago, it was very difficult to talk. Now, I bet now it's really hard to talk
But he did lots of research. We actually went to a conference, that was 25 years ago.
Maybe longer.
But the interesting thing is that what he was saying about the spirituality, and this is kind of where it was interesting, he was able to prove to the extent that you can. I mean, the impact of prayer, the impact of spirituality on outcomes.
Right.
So what kind of bothered me about that was the fact that it was kind of a tool that you put in there, like, okay, we're going to do this treatment. Oh yeah, we'll throw in.
Yeah, it's just a utilitarian
thing. Because it works.
Yeah,
and as opposed to,
right,
it really should be a central, overarching, kind of all-encompassing part of the deal.
Right. Because at the end, especially if somebody's dying, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, right?
Really, the end of the day
is the most important moment, right? In someone's entire spiritual journey, entire life, right? Baptism and the moment of death. Those are the two most important moments, right? In our entire lives. So helping someone to be prepared at the end of life and to prepare for their salvation, to prepare for their judgment, to give them sacramental care if they'll receive it, to allow them to get right with God, with family, all those kinds of things are absolutely essential. And to me, some of this pushback in this area isn't just about the spirituality and being fearful of the spirituality thing, but we've forgotten what it means to be a human person. Right?
Yeah,
the human being, each one, whether or not they recognize it, each person is made imago Dei, right? Each person's been made in the image and likeness of God and should be treated as that precious creation that he or she is, that ultimately will be given the opportunity, right, to see him forever in the beatific vision. And so, gosh, what an incredible privilege that is, especially for patients who are dying, to be able to walk them in that.
Right. And Pray's mother, Pam was her name. She died of cancer. At the end of her life, she was really confined to bed, whatever. And I had many patients, and I was seeing a patient that was in the ICU, actually was and was having trouble dying. I mean, literally, he was terrified.
Yeah.
Trouble dying. And so I'd go by and talk with him. Well, I went by one day, and he was fine. He was smiling up and about, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Pam came to see me," which was impossible because she was confined to bed, but she did. Somehow
she brought her.
Yeah, sent Trey back. Yeah, so he was part of the miracle. But anyway, to go on with this, he died the next day, and we go talk to the nurses, and they said he was the most peaceful person in death because whatever Pam told him, it made the difference.
Right.
And that was a something that really was incredible.
And it might be able to speak to this. It was interesting when my mom's mother was dying. She was at the point of death at home on hospice, and my dad was like, "I've got to go back. Mom's going to stay here. She'll be gone because of whatever." I mean, you were like, "She's not going to last another day."
Mm-hmm.
And 3 days passed, and she's still alive, not conscious. I mean, not able to talk or anything, but my wife, Stephanie, who is involved in hospice, she looked at my mother and said, "Is there anything you have not told her?" And she said, "Well, what does it mean now? I mean, she's unconscious." And she said, "Well, did you tell her that you've been diagnosed with cancer?" And she said, "You think that would even matter?" And she said, "Go back there and tell her you've been diagnosed with cancer. Everything's gonna be fine, and you can go." And she went back there, and it wasn't even an hour later, she passed away. And Stephanie says, "I see that all the time, where there's people that are holding on for some reason Do you talk about that, or is that just, I mean, I don't know if that fits into ethics necessarily, but
yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it does fit into ethics, right? Because that's how we prepare, right, for our eternal, or for our judgment, right, our final judgment. But no, those kinds of themes are picked up on in the book, you know, and in terms of the patient physician relationship, in terms of providing spiritual care and preparing people, not being afraid. Right, be not afraid is definitely a message for our nurses and our physicians. I heard a funny story just yesterday about a priest who was written up, you know, by his hospital for asking prodding and provocative questions of his patient. And it turns out he was hearing a confession right? at the end of life, and he was written up for this thing, right? So, like, be not afraid, right? I mean, these things are essential; these things are necessary, and our patients are well served when we put that person and their true good at the center, right, of that interaction between physician and patient. And it's hard today, especially for our physicians. I mean, the pressure to see patients in a very quick way, right? Quick visit, and then lots of record keeping, right? I mean, it occupies so much time. It's so depersonalized today, but we can't forget, right, that there's a person in front of me.
In fact, and I've written a book several years ago. This is called Troas Healthcare, and one of the things in that is to get rid of the system that's causing these problems. And so, anyway, that's aside.
And whatever system there has to be a re-engagement. And that's what I think that's why most people I know that are in healthcare get into healthcare.
Yeah.
Is because they love people.
They love people.
They want to take care of people and vets. And when you hear from doctors that are getting out or discouraging their kids from becoming doctors because it's not what it's cracked up to be, it's all based on the system that surrounds the most integral, the most central part of what it means to be a doctor and a patient in a situation. And that's tremendously sad. But I still think that, like you said, be not afraid to say, I'm still here, and there's all these things that I have to do. I do find it difficult. I've talked to doctors that have gotten out of the kind of, you got to see 30 patients in a day, that I've talked to that said, I wasn't even practicing medicine. I just throw something at it and say, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's not really life or death, but they'll be back in 3 days if it's not working, and we'll do it again.
Yeah,
and they got out of it because there was not, because part of it, and you've talked about it, it's how important the history is, which means actually listening to a person, right, Ed?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. The history, and that's, again, a relationship, which is what I loved about medicine. I've retired for a couple of years now, but the actual getting to know the person, and that takes time, you can't do that in 15 minutes. So my concept was, when I was in practice, I would not tell them this, but they would know that I'm not going to quit talking to you until you're ready to go.
Sure.
And so I wouldn't do well in managed care.
Yeah, right.
So the point is that I would sometimes come out of the room and the people would say, Dr. Cashion, you're way behind. I said, it's okay.
Right.
God will take care of it.
What you're sharing there just reminds me of, there's a passage from Benedict XVI in his Caritas in Veritate, in which he says that, I'll paraphrase it, but that man is seeking desperately for a look of love, right? He said there's a look of love for which every man and woman is craving, right? And there's never a more important moment, perhaps, right, than within the medical context, right? When we come face to face with our frailty, to see a look of love from a nurse, right? To see a look of love from a physician, to hear it in the tone, to feel it in the countenance of a physician or patient who genuinely cares for the patient, isn't afraid to hold a hand or to pat a shoulder, right? Or to make a small joke when it's fitting and appropriate, to have like a genuine, personal, loving, properly ordered, loving relationship. It's a beautiful thing. It's awesome that you were able to do that for so many years.
Yeah, it was 55 years.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's one of your, that's central to how, I mean, all the lives you saved or the people you've come across.
And again, when that came up, I used to always say, I didn't save the life.
Right. Well,
the man up there did. He told me how to do it, and that's how I did it.
Of course.
But yeah, so as happens quite frequently these days, I lose my train of thought because I really had a good one. Trust me.
You're the young guy in the room, Trey.
That's right.
I'm in the middle of the road here, but feeling older every day. But anyway, I think that it's. Well, I know what I was going to say. I think it's important to encourage the people who are listening, and if they're medical students or doctors, to say, look, all the stuff that you've learned is vitally important. I mean, what you need to do, but everybody, no matter whether they're the orderly that goes in there or whatever, should know that look of love can have a tremendous impact on the outcome, on the way the person experiences whatever they're going through.
Right.
And to not, which I do think does happen sometimes, and maybe because you have the kind of wanting to disconnect and not kind of look at it scientifically. And so we don't want to, and I think that in and of itself can lead to where you don't get the look of love because
right.
Well, it's not appropriate, to pat them or hold their hand or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, because you've done that.
And I think that's the tone of voice, your attitude when you go in to see the person, even if it's not the being appropriate is very appropriate, but the fact is that you don't want to go in with a sourpuss look on your face. You don't want to go talk about pessimistic things. I think it's really important in the healing process for to be upbeat and look, I have faith. Everything's going to be okay. You should have faith, and we're going to do everything we can with the good Lord's help to make it happen.
Right.
And that was sort of, and actually I had a huge practice, and people came to me because of that. Not because of necessarily where I trained and what I did, but they knew he's going to be upbeat and good and loving, and that is really important.
Sure.
Yeah. So, as is typically the case in these shows, we've gone over, which is fine. But I hope that we haven't scared you off, Arland, because there's
lots.
I could talk about a bunch, and maybe if you'd be okay with it around your schedule, we could do several in a row and maybe dig down. But I think that it's important, and I would encourage my son, not that he needs any more textbooks in medical school, but I would love to see, because I'm sure that book's probably not being taught where he is, even though it should be.
Right.
So
tell us about the book. How can people? Is it something that's going to be sold to medical schools?
Yeah. So it's called the Handbook on Critical Life Issues. Arland K. Nichols is the author. That's me. And you'll be able to buy it at the National Catholic Bioethics Center's website, as well as on Amazon when that comes. When they finally roll it out there, I think they usually have it a little exclusively on their website for a little bit. And then on Amazon. So if you just look up my name or look up Handbook on Critical Life Issues.
And when does it come out?
It comes out, it's supposed to come out on the 15th of February.
Okay, so next week.
Yeah.
Well, it'll already be.
It'll probably be a week ago.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah. So,
that's right.
Well, I thank you so much. And I knew this would be a good conversation. And I really look forward to trying to get you in for more. Do you have any last words for any of the people that would be listening with regard to that? I mean, you don't have to, but I mean,
no, it was a joy to be with you both, and I appreciate the opportunity. And you should get the book. It's a great book. If you have any questions about any life issues, it definitely, it's an approachable book, and it's not, even though it's a textbook, it's meant to be approachable for the modern student, which means, it's got to be engaging and a little whimsical. I'll get it.
So. I'd like to, I know Stephanie would like to, certainly on the near the end of life issues, because that's what she does, and I'm going to get it for me, but then also probably for my son, and say
awesome
in and around your studies, and go with that. But anyway, thank y'all for listening. I hope it's been great for me to catch up with Arland, and
great for me too,
for that, and we look forward to having you back.
Sounds good.
And so God bless you guys. Remember that the joy of medicine flows from living out the Christian ethic in what you do, and love your patients. God bless, and goodbye.